The smell of roasting turkey filled my kitchen as I checked the timer one last time. 24 hours until Thanksgiving, and everything had to be perfect. My children would arrive tomorrow expecting their childhood home to sparkle, the dining room table set with Grandma's china and their mother ready to serve. I'd been preparing for weeks, shopping for their favorite dishes, polishing silver that hadn't seen daylight since last year's gathering. The house felt too quiet as I worked, my footsteps echoing through rooms that once overflowed with laughter. At 68, these holiday preparations took longer than they used to, but I refused to let my family down. My hands trembled slightly as I folded napkins, thinking about how much this tradition meant to me. What I didn't know was that my children had already made their decision about this Thanksgiving, and about me. The brass key to my safety deposit box caught the light as I retrieved it from my jewelry box that Wednesday morning. Inside that vault sat documents that would change everything, but first I needed to understand why my phone had been ringing all morning. Sarah's name flashed on the screen for the 4th time, and I finally answered. "Mom, we need to talk," she said, her voice carrying that familiar tone she'd used since childhood when delivering bad news. My stomach dropped. Behind her, I could hear my son Michael's voice, then Lisa chiming in. All 3 of my children on speakerphone. That never meant anything good. I gripped the phone tighter, my wedding ring clicking against the plastic case. The turkey baster slipped from my other hand, clattering onto the kitchen counter as dread settled in my chest like lead. Something was very wrong. "Mom, we've been talking, and we think it's time you move somewhere more suitable for your age," Sarah began, her words measured and rehearsed. Michael jumped in before I could respond. "We found a really nice assisted living facility across town. Clean, safe, lots of activities." Lisa added her voice to the chorus. "You'll make new friends, Mom. People your own age who understand." The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, the walls closing in as their words hit me. I'd raised these 3 children in this house, changed their diapers in the nursery upstairs, taught them to ride bikes on the driveway outside. Now they wanted to warehouse me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. "But what about Thanksgiving tomorrow?" I managed to ask. The silence on the other end stretched too long. Finally, Sarah cleared her throat and delivered the blow that would reshape our family forever. "Actually, Mom, we think it's better if you don't host this year," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "We're having Thanksgiving at my house instead. You're welcome to come as a guest, but we really think it's time to start transitioning away from all this responsibility." My legs gave out, and I sank into the kitchen chair where I'd helped 3 children with homework, where I'd written grocery lists and paid bills for 40 years. The phone felt heavy in my hand as Michael continued their prepared speech. "We've already talked to the facility, Mom. They have an opening next week. We can help you pack this weekend." Lisa's voice was gentler, but no less final. "It's for your own good, Mom. We worry about you in this big house all alone." As they spoke, I noticed the manila envelope on my counter, the one I'd forgotten to put away. Sometimes the universe provides exactly what you need at precisely the right moment. My children had no idea what that envelope contained, and as they continued explaining their plans for my life, I pulled out the deed inside, the house deed, along with the property assessments and recent appraisals I'd requested last month. The numbers were substantial, far more than my children realized. This house, sitting on 2 acres in what had become a highly desirable neighborhood, was worth $1.7 million. I'd been planning to surprise them with early inheritance gifts this Christmas, but their phone call changed everything. While they debated which bedroom furniture I'd be allowed to keep in my new apartment, I silently calculated. 3 children, 3 equal shares. They wanted to put me away so they could claim their prizes early, but they'd forgotten one crucial detail about their mother. I hadn't survived 68 years, raised 3 successful children, and built a life from nothing by being anyone's victim. Their surprise was about to begin. I let them finish their rehearsed presentation before I spoke. "That's very thoughtful of you all," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Why don't you come over early tomorrow morning so we can discuss the details? Say 9 o'clock? The relief in Sarah's voice was immediate. "Oh, Mom, thank you for being so understanding. I knew you'd see reason." Michael chimed in with logistical details about moving trucks and storage units they'd already researched. Lisa started talking about holiday traditions we could create at the assisted living facility, how the other residents would love to meet me. They had it all planned out, my future mapped and decided without my input. As I hung up, I looked around my kitchen, at the half-prepared feast I'd been making for children who'd already written me off. The brass key felt warm in my palm, and I knew exactly what needed to happen next. My children wanted to play games with my life, but they'd forgotten who taught them strategy. The safety deposit box opened with a soft click, revealing documents my children had never seen. Along with the house deed, I'd stored copies of their birth certificates, report cards I'd saved, and photos from birthdays they'd forgotten. But the most important papers were recent additions. 3 trust fund documents, each worth $300,000, meant as Christmas surprises for my children and their families. College funds for the grandchildren, dream vacation money, down payments for bigger houses. I'd worked extra shifts as a school secretary for years to save this money, living modestly while building nest eggs for the people I loved most. Each trust required only my signature to activate, money that would transform their lives. But trusts could also be dissolved with equal ease. I gathered the papers, my hands steadier now than they'd been in hours. My children thought they were protecting their inheritance by putting me away. They had no idea they'd just jeopardized it completely. Driving home from the bank, I passed the assisted living facility my children had chosen for me. The building looked pleasant enough, surrounded by small gardens and featuring a covered entrance where residents could sit. I'd driven by it countless times without really noticing, just another building in a town I'd called home for 4 decades. But now I studied it with new eyes, imagining myself as a resident rather than a visitor. The parking lot was full of sedans and SUVs, adult children visiting their relocated parents. Some of the residents sat by windows, watching cars pass by on the street that used to be theirs. I understood their choice wasn't entirely wrong. This house was large for one person, and I did worry sometimes about maintaining it alone. But what hurt was the complete lack of consultation, the assumption that I couldn't participate in decisions about my own life. They'd treated me like a problem to be solved, rather than a person to be respected. The turkey was golden brown and perfect when I pulled it from the oven Wednesday evening, its skin crackling with herb-infused butter. I'd cooked this same recipe for 30 years, perfecting the timing and seasoning until it became my signature dish. My dining room table was set for 4, complete with the good china and silver candlesticks that had been wedding gifts. Everything looked exactly as it should for a traditional family Thanksgiving. Except tomorrow's gathering wouldn't be traditional at all. I arranged the trust fund documents in neat stacks on my desk upstairs, each one labeled with a child's name. $300,000 each, money that represented years of careful saving and sacrifice. Money they didn't know existed. As I looked at those papers, I realized this was my chance to teach them the most important lesson of their adult lives. Actions have consequences, and taking someone's choices away always comes with a price. My sister Margaret called while I was putting away the last of the serving dishes. At 72, she'd been living in a retirement community for 3 years and loved every minute of it. "The social calendar here is busier than my working days ever were," she laughed. "Bridge tournaments, book clubs, exercise classes, field trips to museums. I should have moved here sooner." Her enthusiasm was genuine, and I found myself actually considering the benefits. Perhaps my children weren't entirely wrong about the practical advantages. But Margaret had made the choice herself, toured facilities, weighed options, and decided on her timeline. She hadn't been ambushed by worried relatives who'd already made appointments without her knowledge. "The key is doing it on your own terms," Margaret said, as if reading my thoughts. "When you're ready, when you've chosen the place, when you've planned the transition properly." Her words crystallized something important. Choice was the difference between a new adventure and a forced exile. Sleep came fitfully. Wednesday night, filled with dreams of empty rooms and moving trucks. I woke Thursday morning feeling more determined than nervous. The smell of sage and thyme drifted from the kitchen where my prepared dishes waited to be reheated. By 8:30, I was dressed in my best navy dress, the one I'd bought for Sarah's wedding, my gray hair styled and my makeup carefully applied. I looked like the grandmother my children expected to see, the aging woman they wanted to protect and manage. But inside, I felt sharper and more focused than I had in years. The trust documents were stacked neatly on the coffee table, along with the house deed and a few other papers that would surprise them. At exactly 9 o'clock, 3 cars pulled into my driveway. My children had arrived for what they thought would be an easy conversation about my future. They had no idea they were about to receive the shock of their lives. Sarah knocked first, her key ready in case I didn't answer quickly enough. That small gesture stung more than it should have. When had my own children started treating me like I might not be capable of opening my front door? They filed into my living room wearing expressions of determined compassion, the same faces they'd made as teenagers when explaining why they'd missed curfew or gotten poor grades. Michael carried a folder thick with brochures and paperwork. Lisa held her phone, probably ready to call the moving company. Sarah took the lead, settling into the armchair across from my sofa with the confidence of someone who'd already won the argument. "Mom, we're so glad you're being reasonable about this," she began. "We have so much to go over, and if we start packing today, we can have you moved by next weekend." I smiled and gestured to the coffee table where my own papers waited. "Before we discuss my moving," I said quietly, "there are some things you should know." The silence that followed was electric as my children processed what they were seeing. 3 thick envelopes, each labeled with their names. Official-looking documents with bank letterheads. The unmistakable appearance of serious legal paperwork. Michael reached for his envelope first, always the impulsive one, while Sarah and Lisa exchanged glances. "What is this, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice cautious now. I watched their faces change as they read, saw the exact moment understanding hit each of them. $300,000. College funds for the grandchildren, vacation homes, new cars, dreams they'd never dared to voice suddenly within reach. Lisa started crying first, pressing her hand to her mouth. Michael just stared at the papers, reading the same paragraph over and over. Sarah looked up at me with wide eyes, finally speechless. "I've been saving for years," I explained calmly. "These were going to be your Christmas presents. Each of you would have received your trust fund documents on Christmas morning." The word "would" hung in the air between us like a challenge. "Mom, this is incredible," Michael finally managed. "I had no idea you'd been able to save this much." Sarah was calculating already. I could see it in her eyes. $300,000 could pay off her mortgage, fund her daughter's college education, maybe even allow her husband to start the business he'd always talked about. Lisa was still emotional, clutching the papers like they might disappear. "This changes everything," she whispered. "Everything." I nodded and picked up another document from the coffee table, the house deed, with its recent appraisal attached. $1.7 million. Their inheritance, on paper, totaled over $2.4 million between the trusts and their eventual shares of the house. It was more money than any of them had ever dreamed their middle-class mother could possess. But I wasn't finished yet. The next papers would change their celebration into something much more complicated and far more educational than they'd anticipated. "There's something else," I said, producing the assisted living facility brochures they'd sent me, along with printouts of their phone calls and text messages about moving me. Everything documented. Their plans laid out in their own words. "You've been very thorough in arranging my future," I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "Moving appointments, storage unit rentals, even which furniture I'll be allowed to keep." Sarah had the grace to look embarrassed. Michael shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Lisa stopped crying and started paying attention to the change in my tone. "I've been thinking about your proposal all night," I said, letting the words sink in. "And I've decided you're absolutely right. It is time for some major changes in how this family operates." I reached for one more document, the most important one. The trust dissolution papers I'd had my lawyer prepare that morning, along with the power of attorney revocations that would return full control of my estate to me alone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as I explained what they were seeing. "These trusts can be activated with my signature," I said, tapping the first set of documents. $300,000 each, available immediately. Their faces lit up again, hope returning. Then I showed them the second set of papers. "Or they can be dissolved just as easily, the money returned to my general estate." The hope flickered and died. "The choice is entirely mine to make." Michael started to speak, but I held up my hand. "Yesterday, When you called to tell me I wasn't welcome in my own home for Thanksgiving. When you informed me that my life decisions had been made without my input. You forgot something important. I stood up, feeling stronger and more confident than I had in months. You forgot that the woman who raised 3 successful children, who worked 2 jobs to put you all through college, who saved over $500,000 on a secretary's salary, is not someone who can be bullied or managed. The keys to my house were in my hand now, warm from my palm. You want me to give up my independence? I asked, jingling the keys softly. You want me to hand over control of my life to people who think I can't make my own decisions? Sarah started to protest, but I continued. Then prove you understand what that means. I held out the keys, the same keys I'd carried for 40 years, keys to the house where they'd grown up, where they'd brought their children for holidays, where family memories lived in every room. Take them, I said simply. Take the keys to my house. Take control of my life like you planned. But understand that when you do, you're taking on all the responsibility that comes with treating another adult like a child. The keys caught the morning light, and I could see my children's reflections in the metal surface. They looked confused, uncertain, like children who'd been offered a gift that might explode. None of them reached for the keys. They were finally beginning to understand that choices have consequences. The silence stretched until Lisa finally found her voice. Mom, we don't want to take your house away from you. Michael nodded quickly. We just want you to be safe and happy. Sarah was staring at the keys in my outstretched hand, like they were a snake that might bite her. Taking someone's keys, taking their home, taking their right to choose, I said quietly, is exactly what you were asking me to do yesterday. You wanted me to hand over my independence so you could feel better about my safety. I walked to the front door and opened it wide, letting the cool November air flow into the house. So here's your chance. Take the keys, move me out, make all my decisions. But own what you're doing instead of pretending it's for my own good. The morning sun streamed through the doorway, illuminating the 3 trust fund documents still scattered on the coffee table. $300,000 each, contingent on a choice they weren't prepared to make after all. Michael was the first to crack. Mom, maybe we were hasty yesterday. Maybe we should have talked to you first before making plans. Sarah shot him a warning look, but he continued. I mean, you seem fine living here. Maybe too fine for us to be making decisions for you. Lisa was nodding enthusiastically. You're obviously much more capable than we gave you credit for, she said, gesturing toward the trust documents. Saving all that money, maintaining this house, keeping track of all these financial details. I lowered the keys, but didn't put them away yet. So you're saying you made a mistake? I asked. Sarah's lawyer training kicked in, and she chose her words carefully. We're saying we may have overreacted to our concern for your welfare. I almost smiled at her diplomatic phrasing. And what about Thanksgiving dinner? Am I still uninvited from my own family tradition? The question hung in the air like smoke, and I could see them all calculating the cost of their answer. Of course you're invited, Sarah said quickly. We never meant to uninvite you from anything. Michael was already pulling out his phone. I'll call Rebecca and tell her the change of plans. We'll have dinner here like always. Lisa jumped up from her chair. What can I do to help with the cooking? I know you've been preparing for days. Their eagerness was almost comical, but I could see the genuine regret in their eyes. They were finally understanding how their good intentions had felt like betrayal to the person they claimed to love and protect. I put the keys back in my pocket and picked up the trust documents again. These were meant to be Christmas gifts, I repeated. Surprises to help you with your mortgages, the grandchildren's education, your dreams for the future. I looked at each of them in turn. But gifts require trust between people. They require respect. The question of whether they'd earned back that trust still needed to be answered, and we all knew it. Sarah cleared her throat, and I could see her struggling with words that didn't come easily to someone used to being in control. Mom, we owe you an apology. A real one, not just because of the money. She gestured toward her siblings. We got scared about your safety and let our fear override your right to make your own choices. Michael nodded. We treated you like you were already incapable instead of talking to you about our concerns. Lisa was crying again, but softer tears this time. We forgot that you're the same woman who raised us to be independent thinkers. We should have trusted you to be part of the solution instead of treating you like the problem. Their words felt genuine, but words were easy. Actions would prove whether they meant what they were saying. I gathered up all the papers, both the trust documents and the dissolution papers, and stacked them neatly. "There's still time to earn these back," I said finally. "But it's going to require more than apologies. It's going to require treating me like the competent adult I still am." The smell of sage stuffing and roasted turkey was starting to fill the house as we talked, and I realized I was genuinely hungry for the first time in 24 hours. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, standing up with new energy. "We're going to have Thanksgiving dinner here, in my house, like we do every year. We're going to talk like adults about my future and yours, with everyone having a voice in the conversation." I pointed toward the kitchen. "And you're all going to help me finish preparing this meal, because that's what families do. They work together." Michael was already rolling up his sleeves. "What needs to be done, Mom?" Lisa was heading toward the kitchen before I could answer. Sarah lingered a moment, looking at the papers still stacked on the coffee table. "Those trust funds," she said quietly. "Were you really planning to give them to us for Christmas?" I nodded. "I wanted to surprise you with how much your mother had been able to accomplish." She wiped her eyes. "We're the ones who got surprised instead." Indeed they were. The kitchen came alive with activity as my 3 children threw themselves into Thanksgiving preparation with enthusiasm I hadn't seen since they were young. Michael took charge of the gravy, a job he'd claimed as his own since college. Sarah organized the side dishes with military precision, labeling everything and coordinating oven timing. Lisa appointed herself dessert supervisor, whipping cream for the pies and arranging them on my best serving plates. It felt like old times when they'd burst through the door on holiday mornings, eager to help and sample everything I'd been cooking for days. But there was something different now, a new respect in how they asked for my preferences instead of assuming they knew what I wanted. "Mom, should we use the formal dining room or eat in the kitchen?" Sarah asked. "What would make you happiest?" The question was small, but it represented a fundamental shift in how they saw me. Not as someone to be managed, but as someone whose opinions mattered. My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the back door around noon, carrying a casserole dish and wearing a curious expression. At 84, she was sharper than most people half her age and never missed neighborhood gossip. "I saw all the cars in your driveway," she said, accepting the cup of coffee Lisa offered her. "Thought maybe you'd had some excitement." I introduced my children, though she'd known them since they were small, and watched her eyes light up as she processed the family dynamics she was observing. Mrs. Patterson had been widowed for 15 years and lived independently in the house next door, managing her own affairs with the competence my children seemed to forget I possessed. "Your mother's told me all about your concerns for her safety," she said to Sarah with a sweet smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think it's wonderful how much you care." The emphasis on care was subtle but unmistakable. Mrs. Patterson had heard more than I'd realized about my children's plans, and her disapproval was politely devastating. "Mrs. Patterson has been keeping an eye on me," I explained to my children. "We check on each other daily, share meals sometimes, help with errands when needed." The older woman nodded. "Community support system," she said firmly. "Much better than warehousing people before their time." Sarah had the grace to look embarrassed. "We weren't trying to warehouse anyone," she protested. "We just want Mom to be safe." Mrs. Patterson's smile grew sharper. "Safety comes from having choices and maintaining independence, dear. Not from having your children make decisions for you like you're a child yourself." She turned to me with genuine warmth. "Speaking of which, Helen, my grandson Jason is coming for dinner later. He's the one finishing his law degree, specializing in elder care advocacy. I've told him so much about you." The message was clear. I had allies and resources my children didn't know about, people who would support my right to self-determination. My children were learning that their mother wasn't as isolated or helpless as they'd assumed. By 2 o'clock, the dining room table was groaning under the weight of our traditional feast. The turkey, golden and perfectly carved, anchored the center of Grandma's lace tablecloth. Sage stuffing, cranberry sauce from scratch, green bean casserole with crispy onions on top, mashed potatoes that could feed an army, and gravy rich enough to be dessert on its own. Lisa's pumpkin and apple pies waited on the sideboard, along with fresh whipped cream and my mother's butter cookies. It looked like a magazine spread, the kind of Thanksgiving dinner that represented everything good about family traditions. My children had worked hard to make it perfect, and I could see the pride in their faces as they surveyed the results. But the real test wouldn't be the food. It would be the conversation that happened around this table, the discussion that would determine whether we could rebuild the trust they'd damaged with their good intentions. As we sat down to eat, I noticed Sarah eyeing the empty chair at the head of the table, the spot that had been my late husband's for 35 years. I'd been sitting there since his death 5 years ago, but today I chose my old seat at his right side. "Sarah, would you like to say grace?" I asked. She looked surprised, but pleased, and her prayer was heartfelt, acknowledging gratitude for family, forgiveness for mistakes, and wisdom for making better choices in the future. When she finished, Michael raised his water glass. "To Mom," he said simply, for reminding us that love sometimes means letting go of control. We clinked glasses, and for the first time since their phone call yesterday, I felt like we might actually rebuild what had been broken. But the trust documents were still upstairs, unsigned, and the real conversation about my future still lay ahead. The turkey was delicious, but the most important course was yet to be served. The first few minutes of dinner conversation stayed safely in neutral territory. Sarah's daughter Emma was doing well in her sophomore year at college, majoring in engineering like her grandfather had always hoped. Michael's twin boys were playing soccer this fall and had made the traveling team. Lisa's husband had been promoted at work, and they were thinking about taking a real vacation for the first time in years. Normal family updates, the comfortable rhythm of people who knew each other's lives intimately. But I could feel the undercurrents, the awareness that bigger topics waited to be addressed. As I served seconds of everything and watched my children relax into familiar patterns, I realized how much I'd missed this. Not just the meal, but the sense of being needed, of being the mother who created the space where family came together. They'd been ready to take this away from both of us, assuming I was no longer capable of being the family anchor. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. "Mom," Michael said as he helped himself to more stuffing, "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about us treating you like a child." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think maybe we did that because it's hard to accept that our parents are getting older. We wanted to protect you from risks we were imagining instead of asking you how you felt about those risks." I nodded, appreciating his honesty. "Getting older doesn't mean becoming incompetent," I said gently. "It means dealing with different challenges, but it doesn't mean losing the right to face those challenges on my own terms." Lisa looked up from her plate. "But what if something happens to you here alone? What if you fall or have a medical emergency?" It was a fair question, and I had answers ready. I've been researching emergency alert systems, medical monitoring services, home maintenance programs. There are ways to age in place safely without giving up independence. I could see them processing this information, realizing I'd been thinking about practical solutions while they'd been planning to solve everything for me. Sarah set down her fork and looked directly at me. "Mom, can I ask you something honestly?" I nodded. "Do you ever get lonely living here by yourself? Do you ever think about wanting more social interaction, more activities, more support?" It was the first question any of them had asked about my emotional needs rather than just my safety, and I appreciated the shift. "Sometimes," I admitted. "This house is big for one person, and there are days when I miss having people around. But there are also days when I love the quiet, when I can read all morning or work in my garden without interruption." I gestured around the dining room. "What I don't want is to be forced into a solution before I'm ready, or to have that solution chosen for me by people who think they know what's best." Sarah nodded slowly. "So if you did decide to consider other living arrangements, you'd want to be the one researching options, visiting places, making the timeline?" Exactly. She was finally understanding the difference between supporting someone's choices and making choices for them. "I've actually been thinking about it more since Margaret moved to her retirement community," I continued. "She loves it there, but she made the choice herself when she was ready. She toured different places, compared costs and amenities, decided what mattered most to her." Michael leaned forward. "Would you be open to us helping with that kind of research? Not making decisions for you, but maybe visiting places together, talking through pros and cons?" The question was respectfully phrased, offering partnership instead of management. "I'd welcome that kind of support," I said. The key word being support, not control. Lisa smiled for the first time that day. We could make it a family project, everyone contributing ideas but you making the final decisions. I could see them working through this new dynamic, figuring out how to be helpful without being overbearing. It was a more mature approach than any of us had managed before yesterday's crisis, and I felt cautiously optimistic about where it might lead. As we cleared the dinner dishes, I realized the trust documents were still weighing on everyone's mind. $300,000 each, a life-changing amount of money that could solve problems and create opportunities my children had never dared to dream about. But the money came with strings attached now, contingent on earning back the trust they'd broken with their assumption that I needed to be managed like a child. Sarah was loading the dishwasher with unusual care, clearly thinking hard about something. Michael kept glancing toward the stairway that led to my office where the papers waited. Lisa was quieter than usual, helping wrap leftovers with the mechanical precision of someone whose mind was elsewhere. They were all calculating, trying to figure out how to rebuild what they'd damaged while wondering if their financial futures hung in the balance. The uncertainty was good for them. It matched how I'd felt when they'd tried to plan my life without my consent. By 4 o'clock, we were settled in the living room with coffee and pie, the comfortable aftermath of a successful family meal. The late afternoon sun slanted through the windows, warming the room where we'd opened Christmas presents and celebrated birthdays for decades. This was when the real conversation needed to happen, when we'd determine whether my children had truly learned anything from the morning's revelations. I set my coffee cup down and looked at each of them in turn. "I have a question for you," I said. "If the trust funds didn't exist, if there was no money involved in this discussion, would you still be apologizing for the way you handled things yesterday?" The question caught them off guard, and I could see them working through the implications. Were they sorry because they'd realized they were wrong, or because they'd discovered their behavior might cost them financially? The answer would determine whether those documents got signed or dissolved, but more importantly, it would show whether we could rebuild our relationship on a foundation of genuine respect. Sarah answered first, her lawyer's training helping her navigate the complex question. "I think we would have had to apologize eventually anyway," she said carefully, "because what we did was wrong regardless of the money. We treated you like you weren't competent to make your own decisions, and that's not okay no matter what's in your bank account." Michael nodded. "The money just made us realize how wrong we were more quickly. You're obviously much sharper and more capable than we were giving you credit for." Lisa was more emotional in her response. "I'm ashamed that it took discovering you had saved all that money for us to see how disrespectful we were being. You deserve better from us whether you had $10 or $10 million. Their answers felt genuine, but I needed to push a little deeper. "So if I told you right now that I was dissolving the trusts and keeping all the money for my own care, would you still support my right to make my own decisions about where to live?" The room fell silent as they processed what might be a very real scenario. Michael was the first to respond, and his answer surprised me. "Yes," he said firmly. "It's your money that you earned and saved. You should spend it however makes you happiest, and we should support your choices whether we benefit from them or not." Sarah took longer to answer, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "I would be disappointed about the money," she said honestly. "But you'd be right to keep it if we hadn't earned the right to receive it. Gifts should come from love and trust, not obligation." Lisa was crying again, but she managed to speak through her tears. "I just want my mom back. The mom who raised me to be strong and independent, who I somehow forgot was still strong and independent herself. The money would be amazing, but having a real relationship with you matters more." I felt something tight in my chest begin to loosen. These answers felt real, grounded in understanding rather than calculation. They were finally seeing me as a person rather than a problem to be solved, and that shift changed everything. I excused myself and went upstairs to my office, leaving my children to wonder whether I was retrieving the trust documents to sign them or destroy them. In truth, I needed a few minutes alone to process the day's emotional journey. Yesterday morning, I'd been a mother preparing a holiday meal for children who loved me. Yesterday afternoon, I'd become an inconvenience to be managed and relocated. This morning, I'd been ready for war, armed with legal documents and righteous anger. Now, as evening approached, I felt like we might actually find our way back to being a real family again. The trust documents lay on my desk exactly where I'd left them, 3 neat piles representing financial security for the children I'd raised and loved. But more important than the money was the knowledge that they'd finally remembered who I was underneath the gray hair and age spots. They'd remembered that their mother was still a force to be reckoned with. When I returned to the living room, I carried all the documents with me. The trust funds, the dissolution papers, and one more set of forms I hadn't shown them yet. My children watched nervously as I spread everything on the coffee table between us, their futures literally laid out in black and white. "I've made some decisions," I said, settling back into my chair. "First, about the trust funds." I picked up the 3 thick envelopes, each representing dreams and security and opportunities. These were meant to be gifts of love, symbols of how proud I am of the adults you became and the families you've built. I held the envelopes for a long moment, feeling their weight. But gifts given under pressure aren't really gifts at all. They're payments. Sarah started to speak, but I held up my hand. "So, I'm not giving these to you today." The disappointment on their faces was immediate and obvious, but I wasn't finished yet, and the next part would surprise them even more than the money had. "I'm not giving them to you today," I continued, "because I want you to earn them properly. I want these to be real gifts again, based on trust and respect rather than guilt and fear." I set the trust documents aside and picked up the 3rd set of papers they hadn't seen yet. "Instead, I'm giving you something more valuable. I'm giving you the chance to be involved in planning my future as partners rather than caretakers." The new documents were consultation agreements I'd had drawn up, formal arrangements that would give each of my children specific roles in helping me research and evaluate living options while preserving my final decision-making authority. Sarah would handle legal aspects, Michael would research financial implications, and Lisa would focus on social and healthcare considerations. It was a way to channel their concern into productive partnership rather than paternalistic control. "These agreements make you my advisors, not my guardians," I explained. "You'll have input and influence, but I retain final authority over my own life." Sarah examined her copy of the consultation agreement with professional interest. "This is actually brilliant, Mom. It gives us specific responsibilities without taking away your autonomy." Michael was nodding as he read through the financial research parameters. "So we'd be helping you gather information and analyze options, but you'd make the final decisions about timing and placement?" "Exactly." Lisa looked relieved as she read her section about coordinating healthcare assessments and social service evaluations. "This feels so much better than what we were trying to do yesterday," she said. "We were scared and we reacted badly, but this gives us a way to help that doesn't involve taking over your life." I could see them processing the difference between support and control, finally understanding that their fear had driven them to attempt the latter when I needed the former. The consultation agreements represented a mature approach to family decision-making, one that honored both their concern for my welfare and my right to self-determination. It was a framework that could work for years to come as my needs evolved and changed. "There's one more thing," I said, reaching for the trust documents again. "These will be yours eventually, but I want to modify the terms slightly." I pulled out the amendment forms I'd prepared. Instead of lump sum payments, they'll be distributed over 5 years, starting when we successfully complete our first consultation project together. The modification served 2 purposes. It would ensure ongoing family cooperation rather than a one-time transaction, and it would provide ongoing financial security for my grandchildren's education over time, rather than a windfall that might be poorly managed. The first installment comes when we've toured 3 different living communities and created a comprehensive comparison report, I explained. Future installments depend on continued partnership and mutual respect. Michael laughed, but it was a sound of admiration rather than humor. "You're making sure we stay invested in treating you right for years to come." I smiled back at him. "I'm ensuring that your financial incentive aligns with my emotional needs. Good business and good family relationship principles both." The sun was setting by the time we finished going through all the documents, and my children were preparing to leave for their respective homes. The atmosphere had transformed completely, from the morning's tension to something that felt genuinely hopeful. Sarah hugged me goodbye with more warmth than I'd felt from her in years. "Mom, I'm sorry we forgot how capable you are. Thank you for reminding us." Michael's embrace was equally heartfelt. And thank you for not giving up on us when we acted like idiots. Lisa lingered the longest, helping me wrap leftovers and load the dishwasher. I love you, Mom, she said simply. Not your money, not this house, not what you can do for us. Just you. It was exactly what I needed to hear. As their cars pulled out of my driveway, I felt exhausted but satisfied. The crisis that had begun with a phone call about assisted living had evolved into an opportunity to rebuild our family relationships on a stronger foundation than they'd ever had before. The brass key in my pocket felt lighter than it had in days. Mrs. Patterson knocked on my back door as I was putting away the last of the dishes. "How did it go, dear?" she asked, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Better than expected," I replied, pouring her a cup of coffee and settling in to tell her about the day's revelations. She listened with the focused attention of someone who understood family dynamics and their complications. "Those children of yours needed to learn that aging doesn't mean becoming incompetent," she said when I finished. "You handled it perfectly, firm but fair, with consequences that taught them something important." I showed her the consultation agreements, and she nodded approvingly. "This is exactly how my grandson Jason advises his clients to handle family concerns about independence. Partnership instead of paternalism." As we sat in my kitchen sharing leftover pie, I realized how much I valued having a friend who understood the challenges of maintaining dignity while acknowledging the realities of aging. Mrs. Patterson was living proof that growing older didn't require surrendering autonomy, and her example had given me courage when I needed it most. The next morning, I woke up feeling more energetic than I had in months. The crisis with my children had forced me to confront questions about my future that I'd been avoiding, and having a plan felt better than living with uncertainty. I called my sister Margaret and told her about the previous day's events. She laughed when I described handing my children the house keys as a challenge to their assumptions. "You always were the dramatic one in the family," she said fondly. "But it worked, didn't it? They needed to understand what they were really asking of you." Margaret offered to show me around her retirement community whenever I was ready to start exploring options, with no pressure to make any decisions. "The key is looking when you're ready, not when someone else decides you should be ready," she emphasized. Her offer felt supportive rather than pushy, exactly the kind of help I wanted from my family going forward. It was a good reminder that there were people in my life who understood the difference. Sarah called later that morning with an apology for the previous day's emotional intensity and a request to schedule our first consultation meeting. "I've been researching elder care attorneys who specialize in aging-in-place resources," she said. "Would you like me to set up some interviews so we can learn about all the options available to you?" Her tone was respectful and collaborative, seeking permission rather than assuming authority. Michael texted me a list of questions about my current expenses and financial goals, explaining that he wanted to understand what kind of budget we should be working with for any future living arrangements. Lisa called to ask about scheduling a comprehensive health assessment that would give us baseline information for planning purposes. All three of them were jumping into their new advisory roles with enthusiasm, channeling their concern into productive research rather than paternalistic control. It felt like a family working together toward a common goal, rather than children managing an incompetent parent. The difference was remarkable and encouraging. Over the weekend, I found myself looking at my house with new eyes, considering it objectively rather than emotionally for the first time in years. It was a large house for one person, with stairs that were becoming more challenging and maintenance requirements that took increasing amounts of my time and energy. The yard that I'd once loved gardening in now felt overwhelming on days when my arthritis flared. But it was also the repository of 40 years of memories, the place where my children had grown up and where my grandchildren still came for holidays. Walking through the rooms where I'd raised my family, I tried to imagine how it would feel to leave them behind voluntarily rather than being forced out by well-meaning relatives. The prospect was still emotional, but it felt different when framed as my choice rather than their ultimatum. Margaret was right about timing being everything. When I was ready to make changes, I wanted them to be my changes based on my priorities and timeline. Monday morning brought the first official consultation meeting at my kitchen table. Sarah arrived with a briefcase full of research. Michael had a folder of financial worksheets, and Lisa carried a stack of healthcare resources. We spent 2 hours going through everything they'd gathered, and I was impressed by the thoroughness of their work. Sarah had found 3 different elder care attorneys who offered free initial consultations, along with information about aging-in-place resources, home modification specialists, and legal documents that could protect my interests while ensuring my wishes were respected. Michael had created a comprehensive budget analysis showing the costs of staying in my current home versus various alternative living arrangements, complete with projections for different scenarios and timelines. Lisa had researched everything from medical alert systems to home healthcare services to social programs that could provide support and companionship. It was exactly the kind of partnership I'd hoped for when I drew up those consultation agreements. They were treating me like a competent adult, seeking their professional expertise, rather than a confused elderly person who needed their protection. The research revealed options I hadn't known existed. There were home-sharing programs that matched older homeowners with younger tenants who provided companionship and assistance in exchange for reduced rent. Adult day programs offered social interaction and activities without requiring residential placement. Home modification specialists could install everything from grab bars and ramps to elevator systems that would make multi-story living safer and easier. Medical alert systems had evolved far beyond the basic "I've fallen and can't get up" devices I remembered, now offering sophisticated monitoring that could detect falls, medication adherence, and changes in daily routine patterns. The financial analysis showed that many of these services could be implemented for less than the cost of assisted living, allowing me to remain in my home longer while still addressing the safety concerns that had triggered my children's panic. For the first time since this whole discussion began, I felt like we were exploring solutions rather than debating problems. It was empowering rather than frightening, and I could see the relief on my children's faces as they realized there were ways to support my independence rather than eliminating it. By the end of the meeting, we developed a concrete action plan. I would interview the 3 elder care attorneys Sarah had found, schedule consultations with home modification specialists, and arrange for a comprehensive medical evaluation that would establish baseline information for future planning. My children would continue researching specific options while I gathered the information I needed to make informed decisions. We scheduled follow-up meetings for every 2 weeks, giving everyone time to complete their assignments while maintaining momentum on the project. As we wrapped up, Michael handed me a small, wrapped package. "This isn't part of the consultation agreement," he said with a smile. "It's just from your son who loves you." Inside was a high-end medical alert device, sleek and modern, nothing like the clunky systems I'd imagined. "I know you value your independence," he said. "But would you consider wearing this while you're living alone? It would help us worry less while you're making decisions about the future." The gift felt like love rather than control, and I agreed to try it. Small compromises could acknowledge their concern without sacrificing my autonomy. The elder care attorney consultation the following week was enlightening. Janet Morrison specialized in helping older adults navigate family dynamics around aging decisions, and she'd seen situations like mine countless times. "Your children's reaction was actually pretty typical," she explained. "Adult children often panic when they realize their parents are aging, and they default to control because they don't know how else to help." She reviewed the consultation agreements I'd created and pronounced them excellent frameworks for family cooperation. "You've managed to give them meaningful roles while preserving your decision-making authority," she said. "That's exactly what successful aging in place requires." Janet also helped me understand my legal rights and options, including healthcare directives, financial powers of attorney, and estate planning documents that could protect my interests while ensuring my wishes were honored. Knowledge was power, and understanding my options made me feel more confident about navigating whatever the future might hold. The consultation fee was worth every penny for the peace of mind it provided. The home modification assessment revealed possibilities I'd never considered. The specialist, David Chen, walked through my house with the eye of someone who understood both aging challenges and architectural solutions. "This house has good bones for aging in place," he said, measuring doorways and evaluating bathroom configurations. "With some strategic modifications, you could live here safely for many more years." His suggestions ranged from simple grab bar installations to more complex projects like a stair lift or bathroom renovation with walk-in shower access. The financial investment would be significant, but far less than assisted living costs, and the modifications would increase the home's resale value while improving my quality of life. David also pointed out safety issues I hadn't noticed, like loose handrails and uneven thresholds that could become trip hazards. Having professional expertise helped me see my home objectively while maintaining emotional attachment to the place where I'd built my life. It was possible to love something and still acknowledge it needed improvements. My comprehensive medical evaluation yielded mostly good news. Dr. Richards, who'd been my physician for 15 years, pronounced me in excellent health for my age, with no cognitive decline and only minor physical limitations. "Your children's concerns about your safety aren't entirely unfounded," she said diplomatically. "Falls are a real risk for people in your age group, and living alone does present certain challenges." But she also confirmed that I was nowhere near needing assisted living care. "With some reasonable precautions and regular monitoring, there's no medical reason you couldn't remain in your home for years to come." She recommended physical therapy to improve balance and strength, suggested modifications to my medication routine that would reduce fall risks, and provided referrals to specialists who could address specific aging-related concerns as they arose. Having medical validation of my competence felt vindicating after my children's assumptions about my declining abilities. Dr. Richards also offered to speak with my family about her assessment, providing professional reassurance about my capacity for independent living. Armed with expert opinions from multiple professionals, I felt ready for the next phase of family negotiations. The second family consultation meeting had a completely different tone from our Thanksgiving confrontation. My children arrived prepared to discuss professional recommendations rather than argue about hypothetical dangers. Sarah had scheduled the legal consultations and was coordinating the various assessments I'd requested. Michael had refined his financial projections based on actual cost estimates for home modifications and support services. Lisa had researched adult day programs and social activities that could address isolation concerns while maintaining my residential independence. The evidence was overwhelming. With reasonable precautions and modest investments, I could remain in my home safely for the foreseeable future. More importantly, the research process had transformed my children from worried critics into productive partners. They were no longer trying to solve the problem of their aging mother. They were helping their competent mother solve the challenges of aging successfully. The shift in perspective had changed everything about our family dynamic, creating collaboration where there had been conflict just weeks before. "I have an announcement," I said, as we finished reviewing all the professional assessments. "I've decided to implement the home modifications David recommended and enroll in the adult day program Lisa found." Their faces lit up with relief and satisfaction. "I'm also going to hire the part-time housekeeper Sarah suggested and install the medical monitoring system Michael researched." These decisions represented compromise on my part, acknowledging their concerns while maintaining my independence. "But," I continued, "I want to be clear that these are my choices based on information you helped me gather, not requirements you're imposing on me." The distinction mattered to all of us. They were supporting my decisions rather than making decisions for me, and that difference had restored the mutual respect that had been missing from our relationship. Sarah reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Speaking of support," she said with a smile, "we have something for you." Inside were contracts with all the service providers we'd researched, already negotiated and ready for my signature. They'd taken care of the legwork while leaving the final decisions to me. It was partnership at its finest. That evening, I called each of my children individually to thank them for their work on my behalf. The conversations were warm and natural, like the relationships we'd had before fear drove them to attempt controlling my life. Sarah expressed relief that we'd found solutions that addressed safety concerns without sacrificing my independence. Michael admitted he'd learned more about aging resources in the past few weeks than he'd ever known existed. Lisa was excited about the Adult Day program, which offered art classes and book clubs she thought I'd enjoy. These calls felt like conversations between equals rather than reports from caretakers to their charge. The respect in their voices was genuine, earned through weeks of treating me like the competent adult I'd always been. It occurred to me that this crisis had ultimately strengthened our family relationships by forcing us to communicate as adults rather than defaulting to parent-child dynamics that no longer served any of us well. Sometimes, disruption creates opportunities for growth that wouldn't have existed otherwise. The home modifications began the following Monday, with David Chen's crew installing grab bars, improving lighting, and addressing the safety issues his assessment had identified. Watching strangers work in my house was emotionally challenging, but the improvements were immediately noticeable. The new shower grab bars made bathing safer and less strenuous. Better lighting in the hallways eliminated shadows that had become trip hazards. Non-slip surfaces in the bathroom and kitchen reduced my worry about falls on wet floors. Each modification was subtle but meaningful, making my home safer without making it feel institutional. David had been right about the house having good bones for aging in place. With professional modifications, it could serve me well for years to come. My children visited frequently during the renovation, offering help and expressing satisfaction with the improvements. Their involvement felt supportive rather than intrusive, and I appreciated their genuine interest in making my home safer while preserving the character that made it special to our family. The Adult Day program exceeded my expectations from the first visit. Harborview Community Center served about 40 seniors 3 days a week, offering everything from exercise classes to art instruction to guest lectures on topics ranging from local history to financial planning. The participants were sharp, engaged, and welcoming to newcomers. Many were dealing with similar family dynamics around aging, and their stories provided perspective on my own situation. Margaret had been right about the social benefits of programs designed for older adults. The companionship and mental stimulation were exactly what I'd been missing without realizing it. More importantly, attending the program 3 days a week addressed my children's concerns about isolation while preserving my independence the other 4 days. It was a compromise that benefited everyone, providing me with enriching activities while giving them peace of mind about my social and mental health. The program coordinator, a social worker named Jennifer, became an additional resource for navigating aging challenges as they arose. 3 months after our Thanksgiving confrontation, I hosted Christmas dinner in my newly modified home. The grab bars and safety improvements were barely noticeable to visitors, but they made hosting easier and less stressful for me. My grandchildren played in the same rooms where their parents had grown up, continuing family traditions in the house that had almost been taken away from me. The meal was delicious, the conversation was warm, and the gift exchange included something special for each of my children. I handed them their trust fund documents, signed and notarized, the first installments of their inheritance distributed as promised. $300,000 each, earned through months of respectful collaboration and partnership. Their faces showed surprise and gratitude, but more importantly, they showed understanding of why the money had been contingent on rebuilding trust. "Thank you for letting us earn these," Sarah said quietly. "Not just the money, but the right to be part of your life as partners rather than caretakers." Michael hugged me tightly. "Thank you for not giving up on us when we forgot how to treat you with respect." Lisa was crying happy tears. "This has been the best gift ever, getting our real mom back." As spring arrived, I found myself reflecting on how much had changed since that difficult Thanksgiving phone call. My children had learned to offer support without attempting control, and I had learned to accept help without sacrificing independence. The modifications to my house were complete, and I was enjoying the Adult Day program immensely. My relationship with Mrs. Patterson had deepened into genuine friendship based on mutual respect between competent neighbors. Most importantly, my family relationships had been rebuilt on a foundation of adult partnership rather than paternalistic concern. The consultation agreements had evolved into ongoing collaboration, with my children continuing to research and support my aging-in-place goals while respecting my decision-making authority. We met monthly to review how things were going and adjust support services as needed. It was a model that could work for years as my needs changed and evolved. The trust funds continued to be distributed annually, contingent on continued mutual respect and partnership. Money had been the catalyst for change, but relationship had been the real prize we'd all won through this difficult process. The anniversary of our Thanksgiving crisis arrived with a family dinner that felt completely different from the previous year's confrontation. My children brought their spouses and children, and my house once again overflowed with laughter and conversation. The turkey was perfect, the sides were delicious, and the atmosphere was filled with gratitude for lessons learned and relationships rebuilt. As we sat around the table that had witnessed both conflict and reconciliation, I realized how much stronger our family had become through facing this challenge together. My children had grown into adults who could balance concern with respect, and I had learned to accept support without surrendering autonomy. We'd all discovered that aging successfully required partnership rather than paternalism, communication rather than control. The brass keys to my house remained in my pocket, symbol of the independence I'd fought to preserve, and the family who'd learned to support rather than manage my choices. As I looked around the table at faces I loved, I knew we'd found our way to something better than what we'd had before the crisis began. The trust fund distributions had been completed successfully, each of my children receiving their full inheritance over the agreed-upon timeline. Sarah used her money to pay off her mortgage and establish college funds for her children. Michael started the consulting business he'd dreamed about for years, with financial security allowing him to take entrepreneurial risks. Lisa and her husband bought the vacation home they'd always wanted, creating new memories for their family while maintaining their regular life. More importantly than the money, though, was the process through which they'd earned it. Months of treating me as a competent adult, collaborating on solutions rather than imposing management, and rebuilding trust through consistent, respectful behavior. The financial inheritance had been valuable, but the relationship inheritance was priceless. They'd learned skills for dealing with aging family members that would serve them well as their own parents aged and eventually as they faced aging themselves. The lessons learned through our crisis would benefit multiple generations of our family, creating patterns of respect and partnership that could last long after I was gone. Now, as I write this story 2 years later, I'm still living independently in my modified home, still attending the Adult Day program, still enjoying the companionship of Mrs. Patterson next door. My children continue to be supportive partners in managing aging challenges as they arise, but they no longer try to control my decisions or assume I'm incapable of managing my own life. We've weathered several minor health scares and home maintenance crises together, each time finding solutions that preserved my independence while addressing practical concerns. The framework we established during those difficult months after Thanksgiving continues to serve us well, providing structure for family support without sacrificing individual autonomy. My grandchildren are learning through example that aging doesn't mean becoming powerless, that older adults deserve respect and partnership rather than management and control. These lessons will serve them well as they navigate their own family relationships in the future. The confrontation that began with, "You're not welcome at Thanksgiving," has evolved into a model of successful intergenerational cooperation that I'm proud to have helped create. If you're dealing with similar family dynamics around aging parents or growing older yourself, I hope our story provides some useful insights. The key lessons we learned were simple but powerful. Aging doesn't mean becoming incompetent. Concern should lead to partnership rather than control, and financial incentives can align with relationship goals when structured thoughtfully. Family members need to communicate as adults rather than defaulting to parent-child dynamics that no longer serve anyone well. Professional consultation can provide objective perspective when emotions run high, and legal frameworks can protect everyone's interests while preserving dignity and autonomy. Most importantly, crisis can become opportunity when handled with wisdom and patience. Our family is stronger now than it was before this challenge began, and the skills we develop together will continue serving us well as we navigate whatever the future brings. Sometimes the most difficult conversations lead to the most meaningful growth, and sometimes handing someone the keys to your life teaches them more about responsibility than any lecture ever could. Thank you for sharing this journey with us, and I'd love to hear about your own experiences with family dynamics around aging in the comments below.